In 1610, two women stood at the precipice of impossible love. One was Infanta Isabel Clara Eugenia, daughter of the most powerful king in Europe. The other was Maria of Portugal, a lady-in-waiting whose mere presence made the princess forget her royal obligations. Their love was forbidden, dangerous, and absolutely undeniable. When the court discovered their secret, Isabel faced an impossible choice: marry the prince her father had chosen, securing political alliances that would shape Europe, or abandon everything for a love that could never be acknowledged. What happened next would shock the Spanish court and echo through history. Subscribe to hear more untold stories of forbidden love throughout history. Your support helps us bring these hidden voices to light. Hit that bell icon and let us know in the comments, would you choose love or duty?
The palace of Aranjuez gleamed under the Castilian sun, its marble corridors echoing with the footsteps of servants, courtiers, and the weight of centuries of royal tradition. Within those gilded walls lived Infanta Isabel Clara Eugenia, daughter of King Philip III of Spain, a woman trained since birth for one purpose: to be a political pawn in the grand chess game of European royal alliances. At 24, Isabel was considered past her prime for marriage, a fact that haunted her father's advisors. She had already refused 3 advantageous matches, citing divine contemplation and a need to discern God's will for her life. The court whispered that she was too pious, too stubborn, too independent. They had no idea of the real reason behind her refusals. Her name was Maria. Maria of Portugal arrived at the Spanish court 2 years prior, a distant cousin sent to serve as lady-in-waiting to the Infanta. She was 22, with eyes the color of autumn chestnuts and a laugh that seemed to illuminate even the darkest corners of the palace. She moved with a grace that made even simple tasks look like poetry, and when she read aloud from books of philosophy and poetry during the long afternoons, her voice wrapped around Isabel's heart like silk. Their friendship began innocently enough. Maria would attend Isabel during her morning prayers, help her dress in the elaborate gowns required for court appearances, and accompany her on walks through the palace gardens. But somewhere between the shared confidences and stolen glances, something shifted. The air between them became charged with an electricity that both terrified and exhilarated them. Isabel first realized she was in love during a summer evening when Maria was brushing her hair before bed. It was an intimate ritual, one they'd performed hundreds of times, but that night, when Maria's fingers accidentally grazed the nape of her neck, Isabel felt something ignite within her. She met Maria's eyes in the mirror and saw her own desire reflected back. "Your Highness," Maria whispered, her hands trembling. "Don't," Isabel interrupted, turning to face her. "Don't call me that when we're alone. I'm just Isabel. Just me." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "You're never just anything. You're everything." The confirmation hung between them, dangerous and beautiful. They both knew what these feelings meant, what they could cost. The church condemned such love as unnatural. Society would destroy them. The court would exile Maria and force Isabel into a marriage that would kill her spirit. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Isabel reached up and cupped Maria's face, her thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "I don't know what this is," she whispered. "I only know that when I'm with you, I feel alive for the first time in my life. When you're near, I can breathe. When you're gone, the palace feels like a tomb." "Isabel," Maria's voice broke on her name. "We can't. You know we can't." "I know," Isabel replied, her heart shattering even as it soared. "But tell me you don't feel it too. Tell me I'm alone in this madness, and I'll never speak of it again." Maria closed her eyes, a single tear escaping down her cheek. When she opened them again, they blazed with an intensity that stole Isabel's breath. "I can't tell you that, because I've loved you since the first moment I saw you. Every day I stand beside you as torture and paradise combined. You are the sun around which my entire world orbits, and I know we're doomed." They kissed then. Tentatively at first, then with increasing urgency, years of longing finally released. It was Isabel's first kiss, and she understood instantly why poets spent their lives trying to capture this feeling in words and always failed. Nothing could describe the sensation of Maria's lips against hers, the way their breaths mingled, the rightness of it all, despite everything the world said was wrong. When they finally broke apart, both were trembling. "What do we do?" Maria asked, her forehead resting against Isabel's. "I don't know," Isabel admitted, "but I know I can't lose you. I won't." What Isabel didn't know was that they'd already been seen. Father Sebastian, the king's confessor, had been passing by the partially open door. He'd witnessed enough to understand exactly what he'd stumbled upon.
And he would not remain silent for long. The months that followed were the most beautiful and terrifying of Isabel's life. She and Maria became expert at stolen moments, a hand squeeze that lasted too long during morning prayers, secret meetings in the palace library after midnight, letters disguised as religious correspondence that spoke of divine love while meaning something far more earthly. They developed a language of glances and gestures that allowed them to communicate across crowded rooms. A touch to the throat meant, "I need to see you tonight." A specific way of folding her hands meant, "It's not safe." And when Maria wore the pearl earrings Isabel had given her, it meant simply, "I love you." But the pressure was mounting. King Philip had grown impatient with his daughter's continued refusals. He'd arranged a match with Archduke Albert of Austria, a widower 20 years Isabel's senior, who needed a wife to secure his claim to the Spanish Netherlands. It was politically brilliant, strategically sound, and personally devastating. "You will marry him," the king announced during a private audience, his voice brooking no argument. "This is not a request, Isabel. This is your duty to Spain, to God, and to our family." Isabel waited rather dangerously. "Father, No more excuses about divine contemplation," he interrupted sharply. "Father Sebastian has expressed concerns about your spiritual state. He believes you need the grounding influence of a husband, the holy purpose of bearing children for the glory of God in Spain." Isabel's blood ran cold. Father Sebastian, what had he told her father? "What concerns?" she asked carefully. The king's eyes narrowed. "He believes you formed an unhealthy attachment to one of your ladies, that your rejection of marriage stems not from piety, but from unnatural affections." The word hung in the air like a blade about to fall. "That's absurd," Isabel said, forcing her voice to remain steady even as panic clawed at her throat. "Maria of Portugal is a devoted servant and friend, nothing more." "Then you won't object to her reassignment," the king said flatly. "She's being sent to the convent of Las Descalzas Reales, permanently. She leaves tomorrow." The world tilted. Isabel gripped the armrests of her chair to keep from falling. "No," she whispered, then louder. "No, father, please. She's done nothing wrong. If there's been any impropriety, it's been in the minds of those who see sin everywhere they look." "Then marry the Archduke," her father challenged. "Prove your loyalty to Spain. Prove that your interests lie where they should, in duty, not in whatever Father Sebastian believes he witnessed." He knew. Maybe not the full truth, but enough. And he was giving her a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Condemn herself to a loveless marriage, or condemn Maria to a life of isolation and silence in a convent. Isabel found Maria that night in her chambers, already packing her few belongings with trembling hands. "You heard," Isabel said, closing the door behind her. "The entire palace has heard," Maria replied, her voice hollow. "They're calling me a corrupter of innocence, a danger to your soul. Tomorrow I'll be locked away where I can do no more harm." "This is my fault," Isabel moved to her, taking her hands. "I should have been more careful. I should have protected you." "Protected me?" Maria laughed bitterly. Isabel, you're the one who needs protection. You're the one who will be forced into a marriage bed with a man you don't love, expected to produce heirs while dying inside. At least in the convent, I'll be safe from that fate. Is that truly what you want? To spend your life in silence and prayer, forbidden from ever seeing me again? Of course not, Maria's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down her face. I want to wake up beside you every morning. I want to grow old watching you read by the window. I want a life that we both know is impossible. But wanting it doesn't make it real. Isabel pulled her close, breathing in the lavender scent of her hair one last time. Run away with me, she whispered desperately. Tonight, we'll disappear into the countryside, live as sisters or cousins, find some small village where no one knows us. And how long before someone recognizes the Infanta of Spain? Maria asked gently, cupping her face. Days? Weeks? And what then? They'd execute me for kidnapping a princess. And you? You'd be locked away forever, declared mad, your name erased from history. I don't care, Isabel insisted, even though she knew Maria was right. Let them. At least we'd have that time together. I care, Maria said firmly. I won't be the reason you destroy your life. I won't be the reason Spain loses its princess. You have duties, responsibilities. Duties I never chose, Isabel's voice rose. A life that was decided for me before I could even speak. When do I get to choose? When do I get to decide what makes me happy? You're a princess, Maria whispered sadly. You never get to choose. They held each other through the night, memorizing the feel of each other's heartbeats, the rhythm of their breathing, the warmth of skin against skin. When dawn began to lighten the sky, they knew their time was over. If you marry him, Maria said as she prepared to leave, promise me you'll find moments of happiness. Promise me you won't let this break you completely. And if I don't marry him? Isabel challenged. If I refuse again? Then Father Sebastian will make sure everyone knows why. And they won't just send me to a convent, Isabel. They'll put me on trial for corrupting a princess. For witchcraft, probably. They'll make an example of me. Isabel's blood turned to ice. She'd heard what happened to women accused of witchcraft. The trials, the torture, the burnings. They wouldn't, she breathed. Surely even Father Sebastian wouldn't. Wouldn't he? Maria's eyes were ancient with sorrow. I'm expendable, Isabel. You're not. And the church will do whatever it takes to protect Spain's princess from what they see as corruption. She kissed Isabel one last time, soft and lingering and heartbreaking. So marry him, she whispered against her lips. Live your life, and maybe in another life we'll get our chance. Then she was gone, leaving Isabel alone in chambers that suddenly felt vast and empty. Through the window, she watched Maria's carriage disappear down the long avenue leading away from the palace. And for the first time in her life, the Infanta of Spain fell to her knees and wept like a common woman who just lost everything that mattered. But the story wasn't over, because Isabel was about to make a decision that would shock everyone who thought they knew her. A decision that would prove that love, sometimes, could be stronger than duty. Even for a princess.
The next 2 weeks were hell. Isabel went through the motions of preparing for her wedding to Archduke Albert like a sleepwalker, mechanically agreeing to dress fittings, menu selections, and seating arrangements, while feeling absolutely nothing. Her heart had left with Maria, and what remained was just a hollow shell dressed in silk and jewels. Father Sebastian watched her carefully, looking for signs of rebellion, but Isabel gave him nothing. She attended Mass faithfully, prayed with appropriate piety, and never once asked about Maria. She was the perfect, obedient princess Spain expected her to be. But inside, she was planning. Late at night, when the palace slept, Isabel wrote letters, not to Maria, those would be intercepted, but to allies she'd cultivated over the years, to Duchess Catherine, who'd once confided her own secret love for her lady-in-waiting, to Count Fernando, who'd protected his younger brother when rumors of his preferences surfaced, to Mother Superior Teresa at a different convent, known for her compassion and progressive views. She was building a network, a plan, because Isabel had realized something crucial. She would never be free as long as she remained the dutiful daughter. But a royal scandal, carefully managed, could change everything. 3 days before her wedding, Isabel requested a private audience with her father. She entered his study wearing the most elaborate gown in her wardrobe, every inch the Spanish princess. "Father," she said calmly, "I need to make a confession before my wedding. It concerns my immortal soul." King Philip looked up from his papers, suddenly attentive. Matters of the soul were taken seriously in the Spanish court. "Go on," he said warily. "I cannot marry Archduke Albert," she stated clearly. "Not because I'm being rebellious or disobedient, but because I've made a vow to God that supersedes any earthly marriage." "What vow?" "I've decided to take holy orders," Isabel announced. "I'm going to become a nun." The king's face went through several shades of purple. "You're what?" "I've received a calling," Isabel continued, her voice steady. "These past months of contemplation have made God's will clear to me. I'm meant for the religious life, Father, not for marriage." "This is Maria's influence," the king sputtered. "This is exactly the corruption Father Sebastian warned me about." "Maria of Portugal has nothing to do with this," Isabel lied smoothly. "In fact, my decision became clear after she left court. Her removal helped me see my true path without earthly distractions." It was brilliant, really. By framing her decision as religious devotion rather than romantic rebellion, she made it nearly impossible for her father to object without appearing to oppose God's will. "You cannot be serious," King Philip said desperately. "The alliance with Austria depends on this marriage. The future of Spain—" "The future of Spain will be fine," Isabel interrupted gently. "My younger sister can marry the Archduke. She's already expressed interest in him. This way, Spain gets its alliance, I get my spiritual calling, and everyone's wishes are fulfilled." "Everyone's except mine," her father said bitterly. "Father," Isabel knelt before him, taking his hands, "haven't I been an obedient daughter my entire life? Haven't I studied, prayed, and prepared myself to serve Spain in whatever way was needed? I'm asking for one thing, one choice that's truly mine. Let me serve God in the way I feel called to serve." The king looked at his daughter, seeing for perhaps the first time the strength behind her gentle demeanor. He saw his own stubbornness reflected in her eyes, his own determination in the set of her jaw. "Which convent?" he asked finally, his resistance crumbling. "The Royal Monastery of Santa Clara," Isabel said. It was the same order as Las Descalzas Reales, where Maria had been sent. But Santa Clara was in Tordesillas, far from Madrid, far from the court's prying eyes. And it was also the convent where Mother Superior Teresa, one of Isabel's secret correspondents, presided with unusual independence and liberal interpretations of monastic rules. "You've thought this through," the king observed. "I have," Isabel confirmed. "I've thought of nothing else." King Philip was many things, but he wasn't stupid. He knew something else was driving his daughter's decision. But he also knew that fighting a religious calling was politically dangerous. The church would support Isabel, and opposing him would make him look like he valued political alliances over his daughter's spiritual well-being.
"Very well," he said finally, sounding exhausted, "but you will wait 1 year. If after 12 months of preparation and contemplation you still feel this calling, I will support your decision. That's my final offer." Isabel wanted to argue, wanted to demand immediate action, but she understood the wisdom of accepting this compromise. A year was better than a lifetime as the Archduke's wife. "Thank you, Father," she said, kissing his hand. What neither of them said aloud was that they both understood. Once Isabel entered that convent, she would never leave. She would be lost to court life, to politics, to everything except God and prayer. And perhaps, just perhaps, to one particular nun who would be transferred to Santa Clara under Mother Superior Teresa's protection, where two women who loved each other could live out their days in peace. If not in the open love they deserved. The scandal, when it broke, was enormous. The Infanta of Spain refusing marriage to become a nun? The gossip swept through European courts like wildfire. Some called it admirable devotion. Others whispered about the unnatural friendship that had driven her to such extremes. Father Sebastian practically glowed with vindication, seeing it as proof of the corruption he'd warned about. But Isabel didn't care. She spent that year in quiet preparation, learning the routines of monastic life, studying religious texts, and carefully corresponding with Mother Superior Teresa about spiritual matters that included coded messages about creating a safe haven for women whose love fell outside society's narrow definitions. On the final day before entering the convent, Isabel stood once more in the palace gardens where she'd walked so many times with Maria. She closed her eyes and remembered Maria's laugh, her touch, the way she'd looked at her with eyes full of love and understanding. "Wait for me," she whispered to the wind, hoping somehow Maria would hear. "I'm coming." And then Infanta Isabel Clara Eugenia of Spain walked away from everything she'd ever known, choosing a life of poverty and prayer over wealth and power. Because some loves are worth any sacrifice, even for a princess. But would Maria still be waiting? And would they truly find the freedom they dreamed of behind convent walls? The answer would change both their lives forever.
The royal monastery of Santa Clara in Tordesillas was nothing like the opulent palaces Isabel had known her entire life. The walls were simple stone, the cells sparse and cold. The daily routine one of prayer, work, and silence. To most of the world it would seem like a prison. To Isabel, it was freedom. She took her final vows on a crisp October morning in 1611, becoming Sister Isabel Clara. She wore simple black robes, her hair shorn in the traditional tonsure, every trace of her royal finery stripped away. As she knelt before the altar, pledging her life to God and to the service of the Church, she felt lighter than she had in years. Because standing in the choir with the other nuns, singing hymns with a voice Isabel would recognize anywhere, was Maria. Mother Superior Teresa had arranged it perfectly. Maria had been transferred to Santa Clara 6 months earlier for specialized religious training. No one questioned it. Convents transferred nuns all the time. What mattered was that they were here, together, in a place where their love, while still forbidden to speak of openly, could at least exist in shared glances and quiet companionship. Their first real conversation came 3 weeks after Isabel's arrival during a work detail in the convent gardens. Mother Superior Teresa had a habit of assigning them to tasks together, always with knowing eyes that said she understood far more than she let on. "I wasn't sure you'd really come," Maria whispered as they knelt side by side, pulling weeds from between rows of vegetables. "Did you truly doubt me?" Isabel asked, her hands deep in the soil, a task that would have horrified her courtly attendants. "I thought maybe you'd realize what you were giving up. A princess becoming a nun to what? To see me occasionally across a dining hall? To exchange meaningless pleasantries during prayers?" Isabel turned to look at her fully for the first time in over a year. Maria looked thinner, older somehow, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and endless grief. "I gave up nothing that mattered," Isabel said firmly. "Everything that matters is right here, pulling weeds beside me." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "We still can't be together. Not really. We're still separated by rules and vows, and we're together more than we would have been if I'd married the Archduke," Isabel interrupted gently. "We see each other every day. We pray together, eat together, work together. Is it perfect? No. Is it what we dreamed of? No. But it's ours, Maria. This life is ours in a way nothing else could be. But we can't—" Maria trailed off, the unspoken hanging between them. "Can't what? Touch the way we want to? Kiss whenever desire strikes? Share a bed openly?" Isabel smiled sadly. "No, we can't. But we have something perhaps more precious. We have time. Years and years of time together, growing old side by side, our love hidden in plain sight as holy devotion." Over the months and years that followed, they built a life within those constraints. They developed a new language of love, one suited to their circumstances. A hand placed gently on a shoulder during prayers, sitting close enough that their robes brushed during meals, working together in the scriptorium, their hands occasionally touching as they passed manuscripts. Mother Superior Teresa protected them as best she could, assigning them to the same tasks, allowing them privacy that other nuns might not receive. She never spoke of it directly, but sometimes Isabel would catch her watching them with an expression that seemed to say, "I understand, and I will keep you safe." There were close calls. Sister Francisca, an elderly nun who'd spent 40 years in service, once came upon them in the chapel late at night, standing close together, Isabel's hand caressing Maria's cheek as she wiped away tears. They froze, waiting for the accusations, the scandal, the punishment. But Sister Francisca only smiled gently. "It's cold tonight," she said softly. "You should both return to your cells before you catch a chill. Together, of course. No sense walking through these dark halls alone."
She'd known, and she'd offered them her protection. It was then Isabel understood. They weren't as alone as they'd thought. Throughout history, throughout every convent and monastery, there had been others like them, people whose love didn't fit society's molds, who'd found refuge in religious life not despite their love, but because of it. They weren't the first. They wouldn't be the last. On Isabel's 30th birthday, Maria gave her a gift, a small prayer book, exquisitely illustrated, with margins filled with tiny paintings of gardens and birds. But hidden throughout the text, in letters so small they could barely be seen, Maria had written their story, their real story, the one that could never be told openly. "So we'll be remembered," Maria explained. "Even if no one else knows, we'll know. Our love existed. It was real." Isabel held the book to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "It is real," she corrected. "Not was, is. Will always be." They lived together at Santa Clara for 33 years. They watched each other's hair gray, their hands grow gnarled with age and arthritis, their steps slow. They nursed each other through illnesses, comforted each other through losses, celebrated small joys that outsiders would find trivial, but that meant everything to them. When Maria fell ill in the winter of 1644, Isabel never left her side. She held her hand through the fever, read to her from their secret prayer book, whispered all the words she'd never been able to say loudly enough. "I love you, she said as Maria's breathing grew shallow. "I loved you from the first moment. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. If there's a heaven, I'll find you there, and if there isn't, then these years with you were heaven enough." Maria smiled, squeezing her hand with what little strength remained. "No regrets?" she whispered. "Not one," Isabel promised. "You were worth everything, worth kingdoms and crowns and all the glory Spain could offer. You were always worth it." Maria died with her hand in Isabel's, a smile on her face, surrounded by love, even if the world would never acknowledge it. Isabel lived another year, a ghost moving through the convent, completing her duties mechanically but with no joy. When her time came, Sister Francisca, now ancient herself, was there. "She's waiting for you, on the other side. I'm sure of it." Isabel smiled. "I know." They buried her next to Maria, their graves close enough that their stones almost touched. The epitaphs spoke of devoted servants of Christ and holy sisters in faith, but those who knew, who really knew, understood the truth written beneath those careful words. Here lay two women who loved each other more than anything in this world, who sacrificed everything society told them mattered for something society said was impossible, who built a life together in the spaces between rules, in the silences between prayers, in the glances that spoke what words could never say. The Infanta who chose love over duty, and the lady who was worth that choice.
History remembers Infanta Isabel Clara Eugenia as a footnote, the Spanish princess who refused marriage and became a nun. The chronicles speak of her piety, her devotion, her rejection of worldly pleasures. They never mention Maria. But love doesn't need history's acknowledgement to be real. Throughout time, countless people have loved in ways society couldn't accept, wouldn't acknowledge, refused to see. They've hidden their love in coded letters and secret glances. They've built lives together in the margins, in the spaces others didn't think to look. Some might say Isabel's choice was tragic, that she gave up everything for a love she could never fully express. But perhaps that's the wrong way to see it. Perhaps the tragedy would have been marrying someone she didn't love, living a lie, dying never knowing what it felt like to choose herself, her heart, her truth, even when that truth had to be whispered rather than shouted. Isabel and Maria got 33 years together. 33 years of daily companionship, of shared faith, of love expressed through every gesture allowed to them. Was it perfect? No. Was it fair? Absolutely not. But it was theirs. And maybe that's what real love is. Not the grand romantic gestures, not the public declarations, not the fairy tale endings. Maybe real love is choosing someone over and over again in whatever circumstances you're given. Maybe it's building a life together in the spaces the world leaves you, making those spaces sacred through your commitment. Isabel could have been a queen. Instead, she was Sister Isabel Clara, an aging nun in a quiet convent far from the centers of power. By the world's standards, she'd thrown away everything valuable for nothing. But she died holding the hand of the woman she loved. And in the end, isn't that everything? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to hear more hidden histories of love that changed the world. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Do you believe Isabel made the right choice? Would you have been brave enough to do the same? Because every love story deserves to be told, even the ones, especially the ones, that history tried to erase. Until next time, remember, love has always existed in all its beautiful forms. It's been hidden, suppressed, and denied, but never defeated. Because love, real love, always finds a way.